This is Richard Barrett, and you're listening to the Matt Balaker podcast.
Good day, fine people out there. And I want to extend the well wishes to the not so fine people, because we all deserve some happiness in our life. And today's guest is a purveyor of laughter and smiles and good times. He's been the entertainment director for the Comedy and Magic Club in beautiful Hermosa Beach for the past 25 years. He also books the Stand-Up Comedy Club, and he's been a judge, producer, and featured speaker at several comedy festivals across the country. Please join me in welcoming Richard Barrett to the program. How you doing, Richard?
Thank you, Matt. Very good. Thank you.
So you have quite the comedy resume. I mean, you're certainly not a one-trick pony, and I'm curious, how did you get into this business?
A midlife crisis. Well, hopefully not midlife, because I guess I was like 25 when I had it. And
yeah, I mean, that's quarter life at lowest, but
yeah,
details.
We'll go with that. Hopefully, at least a third, right?
Yes.
I've surpassed that, unfortunately. So, so it's at least a more than midlife. So I was about 25 and moved down here after a bad relationship and moved down to the South Bay area. I was living in Manhattan Beach, and I had quit my job. I didn't like my job. It was a union job, and I just didn't feel like I could progress based on merits. It was more just seniority. And so I had some money saved up, and I moved down here, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And you hear, hey, write a list of things you'd like to, that you're interested in. And so I actually did that. There was several things on there, and entertainment in general was one, and comedy was also a kind of a sub number on there. And one of my friends was waitressing at the club here, and she said they were looking for someone in the office. And so I figured, you know what? Why don't I go do that? It's a little part-time job while I figure out what I'm going to do with my life,
I figure out what I want to do with my life. So you mentioned you were at a union job, and it wasn't quite the meritocracy of other professions. What were you doing? What industry was it in?
I worked for TWA Airlines.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you and Alonzo Bowden have aviation backgrounds.
Right. Completely different, though. He was fixing airplanes. I was selling seats on them.
Oh, you're okay.
But I think we're still part of the same union, So, yeah. And it was just one of those deals where I felt like I was being held back, and my bosses, nobody likes to hear this, but you go, my bosses just weren't the best. And unfortunately, that came to pass and show that the airline went out of business a few years after I left there. So
I'm not saying it's because you left, Richard,
right?
But I'll let people make their own conclusions.
That's fine.
So you have a friend who was a waitress at the Comedy Magic Club. There's a job opening, and you figure, what the hell?
They were looking for someone in the office to help out, do some financial stuff, accounting stuff, and I have degrees in business management and in finance. And so I figured, hey, that'll be a nice little in here. And it wasn't like late nights. I'd be able to found out I could stay and watch a show if I wanted to. And then I'd go hang out afterwards and still live my life, and then still try to contemplate what I was going to do, as a career.
If you're going to contemplate what you're going to do as a career, I think the South Bay, people who are unfamiliar with it, I think it's the best part of Los Angeles, or call it like the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
It's south, as the name suggests. It's near the ocean. Is that where you grew up, or are you?
No. So I was a military brat and grew up kind of all over. We moved every 3 or 4 years during my youth. And then once I got to middle school, like 7th grade, my family relocated to Key West, Florida. And that's what I consider my hometown and where I grew up. I went to high school there. My family no longer lives there, but they were planning on, they lived there for over 25 years. So
you had roots in Key West, Florida.
Yes.
Now, obviously, you've made a career in the comedy industry, but as a kid, whether it's Key West or bouncing around from military base to base, what was your interest in stand-up?
I loved it. I used to make little pause button tapes on my VHS recorder of all the late night sets and just all the various cable shows during the late 80s. There was obviously the big comedy boom during that time period. So it was all over the TV and I loved it. So I'd make these little pause button tapes. And this is going to date me even more so, is that I had a black and white TV. I had it was a little large black and white TV that my dad had given me, and his old TV, and I had it in my room. And I just remember at nighttime, I would turn the contrast on it completely dark, so you couldn't see the picture, but you could still hear the volume of what I was playing. And that way, if my parents were walking by my door because I was supposed to be sleeping, they wouldn't see like a flickering light of the TV. I'm trying to come in, so they'd assume I was sleeping as long as I kept the volume low enough.
I love that. Well, most boys are trying to watch scrambled porn.
Right.
You're devising a system where you can effectively listen to stand up, but you don't want to get in trouble by your parents. So
it was one of two things. It was reading with a flashlight underneath the covers, or it was turning the contrast down and listening to the TV. And I used to listen to those the stand-up tapes that I made, and I'd kind of fall asleep listening to those. And so in my head, I could still visualize it because I'd watch those tapes over and over. And so, the example I always think of is Dennis Wolfberg making the big eyes when he would say something, and with his punchlines, and so you could visualize in your head the stories that these great entertainers were telling. And again, it was a fantastic time for comedy. I remember watching all the young comedian specials on HBO, that especially the ones that Rodney hosted. That was right during my prime time, and I would go to school with my friends, and we'd just be reciting Bob Nelson lines, doing Jiffy Jeff or the college football all-star team. And then, of course,
that still holds up. So I watched it recently. It still holds up.
Oh, I bet. Just fantastic. But, all the guys and girls that came out during that time, Kinnison and Dice, and then, even like Seinfeld, and all those acts were on those shows. And so it was neat to see what was probably going on more in the clubs, because the language barrier was taken off with cable.
Yeah.
And so you got a little bit more real feel for some of these acts, which was kind of neat, instead of just the Tonight Show.
Yeah. You mentioned the HBO special, and they could get a little more blue with their material and their language. But when you're watching the network sets, what were some of the performers or performances that stood out to you?
Well, like I said, Dennis Wolfberg was always a favorite of mine. Clean, funny, and he was, multiple appearances on, whether it was like the Caroline show during that time, or even at the Improv, and certainly the late night shows. Brian Regan was always a favorite. He was out of Florida, and so you find like that kinship, going, "Hey, this guy came out of Florida. How cool is that?" And he was young during that time period. I remember him having a special on Showtime. He and his brother, Dennis, who's a very funny comedian, doing a special on Showtime. And yeah, Rodney was my favorite comic of all time. So anything that he was involved with, I loved. And
yeah, Rodney was one of my favorites. He might have been my dad's favorite. And one cool story that I'll assume is true is he kind of broke out in his 40s, which is pretty old for a lot of comedians, but he was a dad, and rumor has it, instead of doing the road, that's why he started hosting so often, because he didn't want to miss the formative years of his child's life. Oh, wow. And then so he honed his craft, and then years later he's making movies and millions. So Rodney, God bless you.
Yeah, fantastic performer, great guy. Did so much for stand-up comedy. So
did you meet him, or did you know?
I did.
Oh, well,
yeah, I got to meet him a couple times. And the cool thing about Rodney, he would come down here and headline maybe once a year or so when I first started working here during the late 90s. But he would also call us every now and then and say, "Hey, there's a young comic I want you guys to see. And can I bring him down on Thursday?" Mm-hmm. And then Rodney would show up in his shorts, and he would go on stage, and he would just do 3 or 4 minutes, and then he'd introduce the act, and the act would go up and do just 5 minutes, just do a guest set or whatever. But it was super cool. Instead of just asking for the favor of, "Hey, will you take a look at this guy? It was, I'm going to come down and introduce him. So you could never say no, because you always want Rodney Dangerfield at your
right.
comedy club. So he made sure you couldn't say no, or push the buck as to, I'll take a look at him, not knowing when and how far down the road that would be.
No, that's smart. It creates some immediacy, because if you're in those days, you'd have to send a tape, and you could say, "Oh, I haven't watched it yet." But
right, instead
Mr.
it was a guy whose word was like, "Hey, I'm going to get you on stage," and he would.
Do you remember some of the people he introduced?
I'm not 100% sure. I think Marty Belafsky, who I don't think is doing stand-up comedy anymore. I think he was one of the last guys that came down with Rodney. But I'm afraid
That's super cool of him, though. I mean, not everyone that he vouches for is going to become a household name, but I mean, I'm sure these people, were good, and obviously they got the respect of one of the greatest. So, Richard, you mentioned you started this job at the Comedy Magic Club in the 90s. I think it started in 78, if my research is correct.
Yep.
So it had established, but for our listeners out there, take us back to when you started. What was the club like?
Sure. It was a club that was open 6 days a week. Tuesday through Saturday, they usually had a headliner come in and work those 5 nights. And then they'd also have a variety act, usually a magician, sometimes a juggler, or just something different from the norm that would do a spot on the shows, a feature act, and a host. So it was a 4-act show. The host doing 10 minutes, the feature act doing 20, the variety act doing 10 to 15, and the headliner doing 45. And that happened Tuesday through Saturday, and acts usually came in and did that whole week. And then Sundays, Jay Leno would perform at the club, and he's been performing at the club now for 40 plus years.
I'm curious, how did that relationship start with Jay Leno?
It was just the relationship between he and the owner, Mike Lacey. They became good friends. Mike was a car guy, and so that gave a nice connection with Jay. And then Jay always liked the idea. He's always said that getting out of Hollywood to go work on his act was important to him, that he just felt like the Hollywood crowd had like was a certain crowd that was very similar all the time, and that if he came down to Hermosa Beach, it was as similar as he could find in LA to a crowd that he would find throughout the rest of the country. And so he felt like if jokes worked down here, they'd work throughout the country. And so especially when he was on the Tonight Show, he would come down here and during his at the end of his set, he would break out the little index cards and read jokes that the writers had submitted for the week. And he'd run through 10 minutes of just joke, and getting a live response from the crowd. And then you would see a handful of those jokes on the Tonight Show the next night or two.
That's so cool. I think I've been to some of those shows, and I briefly said hi to Jay Leno, but the people I know have done his show or actually know him have never had a bad word to say about him. And even people who are big Letterman fans, they're like, I love Letterman, and I met Leno, and he couldn't be nice. I mean, has he ever been a jerk to someone? Is there any dirt you can share? I'm looking for something, Richard.
Yeah, not to my knowledge. I grew up a big Letterman guy. Letterman was, the late night guy for my age group, and certainly I enjoyed Leno too. But Letterman was the guy that, hey, I fit right in with and loved doing that 12:30 spot, and it was kind of like stay up a little bit late to see, what's this crazy guy doing and how much fun he would have. So Letterman was my late night show, but no, Leno, great guy, man. He just one of those people that he wants everyone to like him, and so he goes out of his way to be super kind and super nice to people, which is what you would hope. All of us, you kind of go, there's no reason to be mean to anyone, all of a sudden that changes when you're out dealing with people, But this guy, he goes out of his way to truly be nice to everybody. I love, I'll meet him outside in front of the club on Sunday nights, and, there'll be a handful of people waiting they know he's going to drive up to the club, and they want to see what he's driving. And then some people maybe waiting to take a picture. And if he sees somebody with a camera, he'll say, hey, were you looking to take a picture? Come on over, instead of making that person have to go, hey, Jay, can I get a picture? Which most people do, but some people are just too shy, just kind of standing there hoping, hey, that there's going to be a moment, and he'll break the ice, which is very unusual for celebrities that I've seen.
It's very unusual. I mean, it's heartening. And what did his tie with the Comedy Magic Club, or how did it alter the trajectory of the club, in your opinion?
No, I mean, he's really kind of the face of the club. There's so many people who think he has some type of stake in the club or owns the club, and he doesn't.
I was one of those, but
yeah, they assume he does because he's been playing the club once a week for over 40 years. And during the heyday, and certainly during the late 90s when I was there, and early 2000s, he was probably doing 50 of the 52 Sundays with us. He wasn't missing any. Now, he had to be back in town to do the Tonight Show the next day, so it was kind of very much his routine to go out and do shows during the week or even on a Friday, Saturday night, and then fly back on Sunday and then come to the club, do his show here to be ready for the week. And he had a process where he would come down here, do the show, run those jokes. He would go home, and he would either, depending on the time frame, have one or two of the writers come over to his house. Like I know Jimmy Brogan used to go over to his house with him, and they would sit down and go over the jokes, trying to get them ready for the monologue the next day. And he would go, oh, this one worked, this one didn't, and kind of go through those and set it up. And then later, after Brogan, he did kind of a similar thing with Jack Cohen, but Jack Cohen wouldn't go over to the house. He would get on the phone with Jay, and when Jay got home from the club, and they would go over the jokes and start that process of working for the next day. So it kind of was like just part of his routine, and it became like go to the Comedy Magic Club on Sunday, tell jokes, go home, review jokes, start preparing for the next day's show.
So pretty directly, the Comedy Magic Club had a major fingerprint on late night history.
Yeah, I guess in terms of, certainly some of the jokes that Jay decided to tell, came through, trial and error down here.
It was his laboratory. And I think, it's important. You got to work them out somewhere, and better than when tens of millions of viewers are tuned in.
Absolutely. And as you know, there's nothing like having a live audience. I mean, it's one of the greatest things about stand-up comedy, and one of those things that when younger performers are thinking about getting it, if they're maybe writers or something, and you talk to a performer like yourself, I'm sure you've told people, hey, the immediate response you get from someone from telling the joke, getting that, it can't be beat.
Oh, that's the high. I mean, I'm not much of an actor, but the thrill of getting that immediate response from the audience. I mean, maybe theater actors have this, but I don't think it can be replicated on TV or Zoom shows or really anything other than live performance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I talked to a couple of the comics who work as actors, and a lot of them don't watch their performances on TV doing the acting stuff. I just always thought that was kind of interesting that, here they are on stage and they're doing it because they want this response, and then they can't watch themselves because there isn't a response. I guess you can go online and read stuff. Right. You'll hear it from people, saying, hey, I enjoyed you on this show or that show. But the immediacy, boy, that's something they shot 6 months to a year ago. So
yeah, I don't know. This reminds me, my friend Andrew Norelli, who used to live in the South Bay, but his first Letterman appearance was about 10, 11 years ago, we'll call it. And he called me to watch it. And I was like, yeah, you did a good job. And I think he was maybe asking for like a candid opinion. I was like, yeah, I've seen your act and you nailed it. And I was like, what do you think? He's like, I'm not going to watch it. I was like, you're calling me.
Yeah, that's it is one of those things that I will mention to comics is that a lot of them will tape their sets audio and listen back to that, and that's where they do it. I think it's really important that if you have the opportunity to watch a video of yourself, not every performance, because again, I can understand how hard that could be, but every few weeks, you should watch yourself just to look for the bad habits. And there's certain things, comics will do that kind of can affect how a joke is performed and the response to it, because, they're looking down at the ground instead of looking at the crowd, or they're not making the gestures or even facial expressions that they thought in their head that they might be doing. And just seeing that kind of stuff, you'll find a lot of bad habits by watching yourself, not just listening to yourself. So it's one of those things where it's tough to do. However, it can be very beneficial.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not insecure to begin with, start watching tape of yourself, and then your insecurities will rise. But and no, as you mentioned, everyone has weird tics or strange idiosyncrasies that make us unique, but some of them we might want to enhance and some we have to tap down, and you don't really know until you look at it.
Right.
So good advice. And I want to know, our listeners want to know, Richard, what was your first job, at the club? I mean, I know you've been a booker, but was that your first gig, or what?
No,
what were your initial duties?
I started working out in the office here, doing some of the like bank deposit stuff in the morning, some of the office stuff, and then also worked in the office, just answering phones and selling tickets. This was before you could go online and buy tickets online, so you'd have to call in to ask about the comics and just the general club questions and whatnot. And so I'd work here at the club doing that for the first couple months. And one of the benefits was that when I was done, I could stand in the back and watch a show, or if there were seats in the back, I could sit and watch a show, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world. Because I grew up a fan of stand-up, and so every night I would finish work and then go out there and sit in the back and watch the show. And the owner of the club, Mike Lacey, was doing the booking during that time period, and he would constantly ask me, "Hey, you were watching out there. What'd you think?" And I'd give him an honest answer. And I was still watching all the late night shows, and with my little VHS recorder, taping different sets. And every now and then I'd say, "Hey, did you see this guy on Letterman?" And if Mike said no, I would go, "I have it on tape if you want to see it." And so I'd bring it in and show him, and we'd start talking. And so we just started talking, actual performances happening here during that time period. And he just kind of was like, at one point he said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping, me with the booking?" And so I started by just kind of calling, like, he would make a list of like, "Hey, I'm going to have this guy headline," or "I wanted this guy to do the variety," and see if this guy could host. And so I would start making those calls and just saying, "Hey, Matt, are you available to host on the week of, May 1st through 5th? And start making those calls, so I at least had some interaction with the performers. And then that just kind of blossomed to where I started booking the MCs and the feature acts. And then the next step was going to booking the headliners and the variety acts. And I would still just kind of sit down with Mike, and I'd kind of go, "Hey, here's where I'm going to start. I'm going to reach out to these, to Howie Mandel and, the name acts, and we'll start there and we'll go down. And then, but here's the order that I'm going to kind of work in terms of for the next 3 months who I'm looking to book." And eventually the next step was just not having to sit down with him and go over that list, but just doing it myself. And now to where it's blossomed, where I've been booking the shows, and to be honest with you, Mike couldn't tell you who's on the shows.
So you earned his trust.
Yes.
And for about 6 years, I ran a show in Hollywood, and I would often host it. So the reason I did was because I thought the host mattered a lot. I think maybe except for the headliner, and this was just my opinion. I kind of viewed it as a point guard. I'll call it a 90s point guard,
Sure.
not the shoot first ones where it's about, setting up others.
Stockton, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Stockton, I was looking for Malone, when he's not with a 13-year-old girl, of course. But I want to, yes. I want to get your take, Richard. I mean, obviously the headliner is generally why people come, but not always. Right. You guys have a venue that in itself is a draw.
Right.
So what do you think makes a good host and a good feature, and how do they complement the headliner, in your opinion?
Sure. So we'll start with the host. I think the host is a super important position because you're the first face that is representing the show. And the best hosts are the ones who kind of make it like, "Hey, this is my show that I'm presenting to you," and it becomes our show. And the ability to walk out, and I always say George Wallace is the best host I've ever seen. He can walk on stage, and within 30 seconds, the crowd is at ease. They know they're in for a good time. It's like he gave them a big bear hug and just said, "We're going to have some fun tonight. We're going to have some, you're in good hands."
Well, with his smile, how could you not have fun that night?
There's some guys that have a charisma that you can't teach.
Yeah.
They can walk on stage, and immediately you can see the audience kind of sit back and go, "Oh, I like this guy. I don't even know why yet, but I like this guy, or I like this girl." And so those acts that can go out there and immediately just kind of embrace the crowd and kind of go, "Hey, you're in good hands." And it could be coming right out of the gate with some strong jokes and just kind of joke, and like, hey, we're right into the show. So like a Fraser Smith is a good host, and he's just
great.
Joke. There's very little, it's a scripted act. An act like a Brian Kiley, just a fantastic joke writer, where when that act is up at the beginning of the show, the crowd kind of buys into, oh, we're here to hear jokes, and it's not us yelling out or interrupting. It's about these performers, performing for us and us listening. And there has to be an interaction with the crowd, but sometimes it's just we tell the jokes, you laugh, and that's the response we need, and goes back and forth. But the MC, when you can start off with a strong act where there's a lot of people who show up who kind of think, oh, the first guy's going to suck.
Yeah.
That's why he's going up first, and it's just going to basically do a little crowd work and introduce the show. When that's different, when someone walks out and immediately like, hey, here's the show. The show is starting right now. It's one of my little pet peeves is when the host comes up and goes, let me bring up your first act, and they go, no, you're the first. That's the mentality you have to have.
You're undercutting yourself right away.
Yeah. And so I just feel like the MC being the first person you see in the first portion of the show to come out of the gate strong just makes the show that much better. A feature act, you're usually looking for somebody that's a little bit different than the headliner. So if the headliner is someone who's going to do some crowd work, you don't want the feature maybe to do as much to do that. It is, as you become a better comic, it's pretty much what most comics will look at as the easiest spot on the show. The MC's taken the bullet in terms of going up in front of a cold crowd and getting them up to speed. And then the headliner has to bring them home and deal with the check spot and just going the longer amount of time and having that pressure of closing behind us, hopefully a strong show before that.
It's a fun spot.
Yeah.
I say this is a long-time feature. It's a fun spot.
Yeah. And so, but the feature act, you just want to have, again, be a really strong performer that you feel is different from the headliner, but just kind of sets it up where the crowd goes, wow, this is such a good show. I don't want the crowd at the end of the night to think like, hey, this guy wasn't great or this one was better. I just want them to go, what an amazing show. It's nice. We all have favorites, but
sure.
At the end of the day, I want people to walk out going, man, that show was good from beginning to end,
It's like a restaurant. If there's a good, appetizer, main course, and dessert, some people might like sweets. Some people might like, savory items. You want to be able to please all of them, or at least most of them.
And that's the goal here at this club. This club has a reputation as the mainstream room in town. Yeah. We've asked our acts to work on the clean side here. We did a lot of corporate stuff early on, and we do a lot of charity gigs. And so you get people who come to the club based on the reputation of the club, but also some who will come because it's someone else's event. So we're here because Joe is raising money to help fight cancer. And so that's why we're here. And so the mentality of a comic or someone who thinks, oh, you're at a comedy club, come on, you got to be prepared for anything, and for acts to go blue or to go rip into the crowd in some fashion. That's not why the people are here with those expectations. They're just here because, oh, no, we're here for that event. So you get some people who aren't quite ready for the comedy club experience that some people think of. And so this club has always been one that goes, hey, we want to make as many people happy as possible. We want all of our crowd to come in here and not feel awkward sitting at a table. We want them to feel like every act up there is someone that's going to appeal to them. And so we look for acts that are a little bit more broad, a little bit more mainstream, acts that go out there whose goal is to make 100% of the crowd laugh instead of just a niche.
Yeah, it has a feel. It's funny. I think the first act, at least I remember, was about 20 years ago. I watched Bobby Slayton, and so he was not clean. I mean, he gave me free tickets. I remember we chatted afterwards. He could not have been cooler, and I'm a big fan. But everyone loved it, and I've been since. But whereas like the West Hollywood clubs, like the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, the Improv, had a, for lack of a better word, I'll call it an LA feel.
Yeah.
yours doesn't, and I mean that as a compliment, because
Right.
I've obviously been at other clubs, and it could be in Topeka for, I mean, Topeka next to the ocean, if you
Yeah.
get outside. Now that you've been there for decades, I think a lot of times people struggle with, by people I mean comedians. It's like, I'm a great comic, but there's this TikTok guy or person, that can
Right.
fill up the seats, and it's like, it's a business. It really comes down to butts and seats and buying food and buying drinks. How do you reconcile that, Richard? Like, versus the kind of the artistry of an act versus who's going to sell tickets.
Sure. I'm very lucky that the club has been branded itself as a place that can sell tickets. So our shows on the weekends right now, on like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then even Sunday if Jay's not here, we do 10 performers doing short sets, but we call our shows 10 comics doing like an 8 o'clock show, and we have 10 acts come in and do like 9 minutes each, so an hour and a half show or so. And so it's really branded the club. People are coming to the Comedy and Magic Club versus we're going to see this specific act. Right. Now we do have some headliners coming up. I have Ian Bagg, Arsenio Hall, Brad Williams, a couple others on the Orny Adams on the calendar coming up.
And go check them all out. I vouch for everyone.
That's right.
Please continue.
Those are acts that people are buying tickets to come see specifically, and so we do have some of those, but we're pretty lucky in that I don't have to worry about bringing in acts that might not have the quality that we're looking for. And so a lot of the YouTube acts, the TikTok acts, it's not just the owner is pretty, thankfully, great about not having to worry about just selling tickets and sacrificing the quality of the show. He would rather make sure the show is strong and let's figure out a way to get people in here instead of just sacrificing the quality. So it's been interesting I've seen a couple of them, some of the YouTube shows. There's really no show. It's almost like a glorified pep rally, I guess. And, awesome t-shirts to the crowd kind of deal. And a lot of people leave those shows happy because they were just there to see that person, get the picture with that person, and say that they went there. But as a comedian yourself, we know those shows aren't very good.
I mean, I think they're good for the people who want to see them and for one time. Right. It's like at some point you're going to have to entertain them more beyond your YouTube.
Someone who has worked on putting together a quality show. That's what we're looking for.
Nice. So, well, speaking of quality shows, you've been a veteran in the festival circuit.
Sure.
I wrote a book, shameless plug, Greg Giraldo, Comedian Story, and he was in Montreal in '95, and that really springboarded his television career because he landed a sitcom pretty much immediately after that. How did you get involved with festivals?
Just attending a few myself, where I would fly myself out there to see them, or the club would fly me out, just looking for new acts more than anything. Mm-hmm. Never one to like go up to Montreal or some of these festivals where it's just all about the bigger names. The goal wasn't to go up there and schmooze with them and get them to come back to the club because we could just sit here and call those guys. It was always about looking for new acts and trying to be on the forefront of bringing in new blood to the club. Mm-hmm. One of the things is looking at your calendar and kind of going, oh, I got to make sure that there's new people constantly coming through here, so our audiences kind of know that there's always something fresh here, and always trying to appeal towards the younger crowd and bring in younger acts. So it's one of those things where you I'd go out to different festivals around the country specifically looking for that. And then I would be lucky enough to be asked by certain people to be involved with different festivals. My friend Eddie Brill, who booked Letterman.
Oh, yeah. He's a great guy.
In charge of the Great American Comedy Festival in Johnny Carson's hometown in Nebraska. And so I went out a number of years to that. My friend Jim McHugh, who's a comedian, runs the Boston Comedy Festival. He's been nice enough to ask me to come out and be a judge at his festival a few times. And so it's a combination. Sometimes just going out myself and without telling anyone, just going and buying tickets and going to see shows and look for acts and talk to acts. And other times it's been invited to come out to specific events.
Nice. And In your opinion, how has the festival circuit evolved over the years?
It seems to be one of two things. It's either giant names trying to sell tickets in as many big venues as possible, or it seems to be let's put on a collection of um, more local acts, trying to give somebody like, hey, the best, the best that this town or state or whatever may have to offer. So it seems to be really going in two directions. You had the Just for Laughs people have branched out, and they're doing, instead of just Montreal, they do, Toronto, and I want to say like the Bahamas, and they were down in Mexico, and just they're all over the place doing special or festivals. And then they got involved with, I think they're involved now with Moon Tower down in Austin, Texas, and they might have even done like Chicago one year. And so they're involved. And Comedy Central was doing their Cluster Fest up in San Francisco. And Netflix did LA, and I think they're doing LA next year again. And so now there's some big, groups involved with some of these festivals, and they're bringing in the big names more than
it's kind of like a throwback to the 90s in a way.
But you can find both, at some of these. I would go out to New York, and the New York Comedy Festival that have 100 shows going on during the week, and they'd be doing shows in Madison Square Garden, and then also a couple of clubs. And so it's just, I wouldn't be going to Madison Square Garden. Instead, I go to Caroline's at 4:00 on a Sunday to go see the Best of New York show.
So what would you recommend? Because there are certainly festivals worth people's times, but there's also some where, I'm going to call them scams, for lack of a better word, where it just seems like they want to get entrance fees, and then they'll book whoever their friends or whoever. Like for younger or more novice comedians out there, how would you help them navigate?
Boy, it's really tough, because it does seem like to get into any festival nowadays, they're all requiring some type of entrance fee or a fee to view your video, and which in my mind is a shame. But I understand that these people are trying to make money in businesses, and in addition to selling tickets, maybe they could bring some acts out or something if they're doing that. That's the hope. I think a lot of them are just doing it to hopefully make some money. But it's tough. I think you have to use your network and talk to the other comics and people around you. There's so much knowledge you could gain from, local comics and the comics that are maybe a generation ahead of you. There's always some helpful acts out there. And so finding people, look to see who's done those festivals in previous years and talking to them about their experience and what did they gain out of them. There's some experiences. I haven't been out to Atlanta, but they have the festival out there. And I look each year and I go, oh, wow, they bring in some really good industry people. I've seen Michael Cox from The Tonight Show is down there, and the Rose Gardens go down there, who manage acts, and come out of there going, hey, we signed this guy or we signed this girl. And you kind of go, oh, that's good. There's actually some interaction happening. I went up to the Big Sky Festival a couple years, and again, they brought in some really good industry, and there was an opportunity to interact with the industry, which I thought was unique and very important, because it allowed those acts to talk to you and find out that you're not just some gatekeeper sitting up there who's not nice and can't be talked to, and instead just not returning my emails, kind of not answering my phones and phone calls. So having that interaction with people, and that helps spread the word throughout each little community that those comics go back to and their little networks. So I find that very important. So I went out one year for the World Series of Comedy in Las Vegas, and they brought a bunch of acts out. And to be very honest, the acts for the most part weren't ready for my club, but it was a good opportunity for me to meet. Hey, there was like 10 acts that came out from Florida that year, and I went out with them afterwards and had dinner with them. And when those acts matured a little bit and started coming out here to Los Angeles, so I was lucky enough where we already had a relationship established, and they were able to email me and not feel weird about it. Hey, can I come down? And I just moved to the area and say hi, or see a show, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, so I think you hit on an important point, Richard. Is that at festivals, if there's an industry component, that might be a differentiator. If there's none, that might be an indication to save your money.
Perhaps, I always think about just as much though as for the comics when they come in from different areas. That I find that very beneficial because you meet someone, and so the next time you're in Virginia doing a show for you have a college gig or something where you can reach out to that comic that you met at a festival who is in Virginia and say, hey, are there any local gigs I can do while I'm out there? And having that connection and just expanding your network. The more comics you talk to, the better, and have relationships with them. It's a very, very difficult business and lifestyle when you choose to become a stand-up comedian. It's very solitary. You perform by yourself. You generally write by yourself. You travel by yourself. When you're starting out, you're doing the booking. You're doing every aspect of the business. You're doing the marketing. You're, research and development. You name it, you have to do it. So it's very solitary, and there's not a lot of direction. Everybody kind of says, oh, you're kind of on your own path. There's not one way to do anything, but sometimes you kind of go, hey, I need some guidance. And so it can be a very, very difficult process to start out as a comic, and very solitary. And so the more people you get to know and get to talk to, I think can really help you, know that you're going on the right path and give you some confidence that you might not gain anywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, build your network. It's not a union job, so it's really a matter of navigating your own path. And I'd like to learn more about your work at the stand-up comedy club in Bellflower.
Sure.
It's a pretty new venue. Can you tell our audience the story there?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, the owner of the stand-up comedy club, a guy named John Jarius, he and his wife Scarlett, wonderful, wonderful folk, they were opening a club in Bellflower, which is less than 10 minutes from where I live in Long Beach. And I had met John previously. He ran he did a magazine called the Stand-Up Magazine for a little while.
Okay. I didn't know he did that. That's cool.
Yeah. And so I had met him through that initially. And so when he was opening this club, he said, hey, I just want to, make sure I have a good relationship with the other clubs in the area. And I want to he asked if I would come down and check the place out and, and chat with him. And I did. And at the time, Jan Smith was going to be booking the club. And Jan was a longtime owner of Club Igby's in LA. And then he booked the Ice House for a number of years as well. And it turns out Jan was unfortunately having some health issues, and he ended up moving away from locally. And so John had said, boy, if you know anybody that would be interested in booking the club, and this was in the middle of the pandemic, Comedy and Magic Club wasn't reopened. And I said, I certainly have time right now. And, we sat down and talked about just the best ways I've found of running a club and certain expectations that I would need, not just him offering me a job, but going, hey, if my name's attached to this, there's a certain way that the club should be run, and a certain, just at a certain level is what I would say. And he and his wife were very passionate and just good people that want to do well for both themselves and the comedy community. And so it was a very good fit, I felt. And so I was there for them as we opened the club, and was able to spend the first, 6 to 9 months with them there for every single show, being there in person instead of just booking. Wow. But I was able to be there in person until the Comedy Magic Club reopened. And then this is my full-time gig. And but Bellflower, because it's so close to me, it's perfect, and I'm still able to pop in for occasional shows, but still do the booking there and have a great relationship with them where we communicate regularly, and I get great feedback from them as to how the shows are going and which acts they liked and didn't care for, and I'm able to put stuff together. So it just kind of fell into my lap at the right time, and was able to kind of combine it with the job I'm doing right now, and it seems to have all fit together. And the great thing is both clubs can feed off of each other in a positive way. There's enough work out there for
Oh yeah.
There's so many comics out there that want to work. So the fact that I can juggle and do both and make sure that, there's good acts that know about the stand-up club, because the problem with the stand-up club right now is that there's just not enough people who know about it.
Mm-hmm.
It opened a little bit over a year ago, and word of mouth spreads really slowly. It's the best form of advertising, but it's very slow. So
well, that's before your appearance on the show. So just get ready for. But
as long as the masses live in the area and want to come see us, that'd be great.
Well, you talk about the masses, and while the two clubs are geographically close to each other, there's probably what 500,000 or more populations in all, and not to mention travelers.
They're not competition whatsoever.
Yeah, it's like,
and really, the handful of clubs up in the Hollywood area, look at themselves as competition, and I get it. They're not too far from each other geographically, although again, how many people are in that area? There's enough for them all to prosper. But they've fought over the years and have had their share of, it's tough to tell people who you should consider competition and not. But we're lucky. We have a relationship with all the clubs in town that I think is very positive, and that's what we try to, keep it in and maintain it as. And so, I look at it that way. I go, I'm not worried about what the other clubs are doing. I focus on what we're doing. There's stuff that we can learn from what the other clubs are doing. Mm-hmm. But, if a comic's playing there on Tuesday, it doesn't mean that he can't play here on Wednesday.
That's very mature of you. And you mentioned earlier about some of the, call it, quality control issues or tenets that you wanted to impart on the Bellflower Club. What do you think makes, I guess, what are your top, call it, 2 or 3 things about a club that makes it stand out from the competition?
I think respect is just a very generic word, but it's so vital and so important. And it's having a respect for the performers that are coming out there and giving you their time, and then having a respect for the crowd, and also making sure that the performers have a respect for the audience, and that those are the type of acts that you're bringing in. So it's a two-way street. You have to treat people a certain way, and then you also expect those people to treat you a certain way or to treat others a certain way. And so respect is a big thing with me. And I respect the performers. I try to take care of the performers. You try to, whatever that means, whether it's through pay, whether it's through accommodating them in terms of their needs. Again, living in LA, there's a lot of, hey, I'm doing a spot at 8:00 at this club, so I can't be at your club till 9:00. Does that work? Having that flexibility, I always try to go out of my way to have as much flexibility as I can have, because I understand, again, how difficult of a career that's been chosen by these performers, and want to make sure that the relationship is as strong as possible for us, because that's what this club is built on, is relationships. And that's really what my job is relationships. It's about finding the best acts, but also, developing relationships with them at an early time in their career, maybe before they become big names. And so when they become big names, they still consider coming back to, come back and give back to your school, come back and give back to college, after you've graduated, kind of deal.
I like that. You kind of nurture them, let them flourish, and then guilt them into coming back. I think.
Make it so they
of course
look at it as
it's
not
like
another. I don't want to be just another gig. I want people to look forward to coming down here. And what's important there, another thing important with the clubs, is having a familiar face. And so what's good about Bellflower is that John and Scarlett are there every single evening. And it's not just their place, but they're there running the club themselves. And so when the comics come there, to have John and Scarlett walk over and say, welcome, I'm John, I'm Scarlett, we're happy you're here. Let's walk you through what's going to happen tonight. What do you need? How can I help you? And it's the same thing here at this club, is that, again, with the solitary life, to have a comic walk in through the doors and know that I'm going to be here, and I have a relationship with them, and I can say, hey, Matt, how are your kids? What's going on? Where you been? What's new? And have that relationship is very important, because, again, that solitary lifestyle, walking in, I can only imagine how many clubs you've walked to where all of a sudden it's the new manager who used to be the bartender last time you were here. And there's people that are new that you just don't recognize. And
you're mentioning something that's, I think, it's almost like creating a family. Like, I'm just thinking out loud, Richard. Like when you think of the Melrose Improv, like Bud Friedman comes to mind. He's a very sweet person. Jamie Masada at the Laugh Factory, and these are people who aren't only there for like 6 months and then they take another job. It's like people are coming back to see them. So it's different than like working at a hotel or at a Fortune 500 company. It's that continuity, that almost like nuclear family aspect that so many comedians lack when you're on the road by yourself.
Yeah, I think the better clubs have that there's some type of at least a through line from over the years that you can kind of relate to.
Yeah, and we are wrapping up. I would love to have you back because there's more questions, but for people who are maybe newer to comedy or they don't know the ins and outs as well as some, like, what advice do you have for whether it's getting booked, improving, kind of building a career?
Well, it's always just, work as hard as possible to be the best act on every show, because that's who's going to get noticed. So it's constantly the work. The work is what's going to get you more gigs. Your friends or other comics who are booking different shows or other, I don't want to say low-level shows, that doesn't come out right, but shows that are using newer acts. They're going to want strong comics on their shows. Yeah. So they're constantly going to ask good comics to come and be on those shows. And then they'll fill the spots with, hey, brand new people that are starting out or some of their friends and that kind of deal. So always, striving to be the best act on a show should always be the goal, because that's the people who are going to advance. And you'll get noticed at some point. We always all feel that, we want to be noticed now. I'm ready now. And sometimes you're absolutely correct, but most of the time, especially in this business, the great thing about this business is that if you have talent and a work ethic, you're going to become better at this over time. And I'm sure you look at yourself and say, boy, when I was 7 years in, I really thought, I should be getting this and doing this. And then when you're 10 years in, you look back, you look back at yourself when you were 7 years in, and you go, I didn't get it because of this, or I didn't get it that, but I couldn't tell myself that at that stage. And so, it sounds very simple, but you're going to get seen and noticed at some point if you are, truly funny and putting the work in. The cream does rise to the top in this. I will constantly ask acts, who have you seen lately? Who's new that's coming up that I should be aware of? And I have a list right here. There's names written all down my list right here that I'm constantly seeing people online or talking. Those are just comics have told me these names. And then I go online looking for them, or I saw them on a TV show or an internet clip. And I watch YouTube all the time with all the clips on there. And it's constantly got a list of recommendations over there for me that I'm looking at new people. And so I think it's very important to always have some type of new material up that's easy to find. So whether I go to your website or whether I go search on YouTube, there's always something new that's representing what you're doing, because you never know when I'm going to go. And when I say I'm talking about, again, a gatekeeper of this type of situation. Yeah. Are going to go and watch something and trying to decide whether I should bring this person in or reach out to them to do a show. So having something that's current and strong online is always important. It's your calling card. It's your resume.
Have it current, work hard, be good to people. This is sage advice. What have you done professionally that you're most proud of, Richard?
Oh, I think just providing work to so many people and developing those relationships. There's a lot of acts that I'm very proud to see as they've come here, bringing them in for the first time, doing like a 5-minute guest set, and then watching them move up through the ranks to where they're headlining, and then eventually go off to where they're, seeing Gabriel Iglesias do Dodger Stadium, 55,000 people in his hometown, I mean, it couldn't be cooler. Seeing those type of things. That's so cool. So seeing the progression of acts coming in from, when they're just breaking into the clubs to, hopefully sustaining a career as a successful comedian. And I hope that there's happiness there, so there's not like a specific individual moment as much as it is the process of providing work for these acts and giving acts a chance to meet and learn from others, to meet a Jay Leno, to meet a George Wallace, to meet a, whatever act that's maybe somebody they've looked up to, and then get to watch them perform and or sit and talk with them and learn. Sitting in our green room, that's amazing, the conversations that are happening and how many times you see an act go from, asking those questions to then answering those same questions years later. It's kind of a neat thing.
You're a big part of the progression of some of the biggest entertainment in the world. So congratulations. Well, Richard, where can people learn more about you, your clubs? Where can we funnel these inquiries?
Nice. So I don't have any much personal stuff up there online. I'm not on social media or anything like that. But please, just the Comedy and Magic Club and the comedyandmagicclub.com and the standupclub.com, which is the stand-up comedy club in Bellflower. And wherever you are, just go out and, enjoy live comedy, support live comedy. It's, an art form that is unique and is best viewed in a live setting. Watching it on TV, watching it on your phone is definitely a reduction in terms of the art form. So going out and supporting it live is vital, and there's no experience like that. There's no place I'd rather be on a weekend than sitting in a comedy club, just enveloped with laughter and having a good time.
Amen. Comedy is best served live. Yes. Richard Barrett, thank you so much for joining us on
Pleasure,
the Matt Balaker podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed doing this, and I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Matt Balaker podcast. To learn more, please check out mattbalaker.com and encourage your friends to like, subscribe, and share. Really appreciate it.